So we're now moving into two papers, two short communications on management practices. The first one is coming from Canada, more specifically the French-speaking part of Canada. Very proud French-speaking Canadian who speaks perfectly English, by the way. So good luck, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marika. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you this morning. And I would like to present to you results from a study that was conducted in 2014. And let's go. Or not. Did I already break it? Okay, there you go. So as we all know, there is a lot of difference between farms on how they manage their reproduction, but also how they manage their herd in general. And from tie stall to freestall, or from farmer to farmer, you will have extremely big difference. And this study started when we were asking ourselves, how does that management vary between farms in Canada? And is it possible that the management would influence how reproductive performance are achieved on farm? So the two objectives of this study was to first identify differences between farms and how management was conducted, and also were there association between those management practices and reproductive performance. We built an extensive questionnaire that was sent throughout Canada in 2014, as I told you, and we were asking many different questions about how the farmers were managing general management practices, but also specific questions on reproduction. And one of the main questions I will discuss today was what type or types of management do you use to inseminate your cows? And the producer were able to give a percentage of their insemination that was done with visual heat detection, timed AI, activity monitoring, and others, and many of the other were use of bulls. We also wanted to look at reproductive performance, and to do so, we used measures that were available through the DHI companies we have in Canada, and all the respondents that gave us access to their DHI data were run through DairyCom 305, which is a software available in North America, and we were able to obtain an annual 21-day pregnancy rate and 21-day insemination rate and conception risk for every herd that gave us access to their data. All the models we built were linear regression, so we were looking at, let's say, pregnancy rate, and we would look at different management practices such as reproduction management, voluntary waiting period, housing, and use of hormones, that kind of things. We got a good answer rate, and we got 832 herds that gave us information. The questionnaires were available online, but also by paper. So we got a good representative average Canadian herd, which is on average 77 milking cows, and then we had mainly tie stalls, 61%, and then the rest was freestall. I realized that we have an international crowd. 92% of the herds had mainly Holstein cows in their herd. As I told you earlier, we wanted to look at how inseminations were managed. And for analysis purposes, we decided to classify herds as what was the main management they used for insemination. And it was defined as more than 50% of their insemination were done with one specific practice. And if they didn't have one specific practice that was used for more than 50%, they were classified as combined practices. The result we got on what they used was that half of our herds would use visual heat detection as their main reproduction management practice, followed by timed AI for 21%, combined practice with 17%, and then activity monitoring was for 10%. This doesn't mean that herds would only use visual heat detection or only use timed AI, but it was the one that was usually used for most of their inseminations. We got 550 herds that gave access to their DHI data, and we got I extracted pregnancy rate, as I told you, insemination rate, and conception risk. And as you can see here, on the x-axis, you have percentages, and on the y-axis, the frequency of farms that were within every category. In blue, you have pregnancy rate with an average pregnancy rate of about 17.5%. The insemination rate in black was 44% on average, and conception risk of around 40% in gray. When we were looking at different association between pregnancy rate and management practices, some general practices were associated with pregnancy rate. Housing and voluntary weaning period were two of them. These are linear models, sorry. And as you can see, freestall barn would have higher pregnancy rate, about 2% higher than tie stall barn. And then voluntary waiting period, if they had a longer, so over 60 days in milk, longer period, they would have lower pregnancy rate. Some of the reproductive management practices were also associated with pregnancy rate. Insemination per day is the frequency, so not that they would inseminate a cow twice a day, but they would do AM, PM inseminations. And those herd that would inseminate more than once per day would have a little bit higher pregnancy rate. And the use of pre-synchronization for timed AI would also increase their pregnancy rate. One of the main questions, as I told you earlier, was, are the main management practices important for pregnancy rate? And our model showed that even though the numbers are higher, there is no significant association. And I think the next graph that I already showed is showing that really well. So every point here is a herd. And as you can see, in every different management practice, you have some really good herds, but you also have some less good herds. And because we wanted to explore what was the reproductive performance on farm, we thought that pregnancy rate was really interesting because it's a global measure, but we also wanted to look at insemination rate and conception risk. And I will, for the sake of time this morning, I will only present the association between main management practices, but some of the other general reproduction management or just general management were also associated. So for the insemination rate, if you're looking at different management practice, you have, again, really good herds and less good herds. The only difference here is that visual heat detection had lower insemination rates than timed AI and combined practices right here. On the other hand, for conception risk, there was a better conception risk in herds using visual heat detection compared to those using timed AI. Just to conclude quickly, we saw that reproductive performance on farm were associated with general and reproduction management practices, and pregnancy rate especially was not associated with main reproduction management, although insemination rate and conception risk were. Some limitations from this study are that obviously it is an observational study. It doesn't mean that on the same farm, if we use something different, it would work at the same or different. But I think it gives a really good idea of how the industry in Canada is and what type of management is used on farm, and that some of the management are actually associated with better or worse reproductive performance. On that, I want to thank all the respondents to the survey, and also the funding entities, because it's a big project and it was very interesting to conduct. I will take any question.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? I see a lot of people moving, but I don't think they're moving to a microphone just yet. So I'll start off. You had two different management systems, as in the tie stalls and the free range, like free slatted sheds. were there differences in herd sizes between those two type of management? I might have missed it, sorry.
Yes, actually there was a difference also in herd size. When we were looking at association between reproductive performance and herd size, there was a difference, although it was probably confounded or intervened with the management practice. So the type of housing is highly associated with size. And so smaller herds would be mainly tie stall, and then bigger herds free stalls. And it's all indoor. I would say a quarter of our respondent would send their cows on pasture, especially in the summer, wintertime, somewhat less. So yes, it was strongly associated between, they were very collinear variables.
Very good. And then, sorry, I keep asking the questions here, but the other question, the tie stalls, were they more likely to use timed AI? Because visual observation in a tie stall, I mean, if they're tied, they're not going to mount very easily onto each other. So was there was there more timed AI, more synchronization in the tie stalls if you compared them?
It is a very good question, and I actually looked at it, and it will be in the paper in JDS, hopefully soon. There was more timed AI in tie stall, and also we had some opinion questions, and when we were asking how do you find to identify cows in heat and that kind of questions, tie stall would have higher difficulties with heat detection, so they would go more easily towards timed AI.
And then, sorry, one final question. What was your response rate on that survey? Because it looked really high.
Sorry?
You had 858 people.
Because we had an online survey, we don't know exactly what was the response rate. We estimated around 9% because we tried to reach everyone in Canada, which is a big number. So 830 was around 9%. It's 7% of all Canadian farms.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.